What we're focusing on is how they differ and which ones you might want to use in a given situation, or which one may just be a better fit for you in terms of your personality. We'll find out that they really target different types of people. So let's get started with a general description of each of the two. And we'll start with Google Maps. So Google Maps was founded in 2005 as a web-based mapping platform. Its original mission was to provide free and zoomable digital maps. Most of us have used Google Maps as a web-based app for a long time. It still is available as a web-based app. Lots of us used it for planning trips. When I used to travel a lot, I would go to Google Maps on my computer and map everything out and print out maps so that when I was going from the airport to my hotel or the hotel to the meeting location, I'd have the maps that I'd printed from Google Maps. And it's still used by a lot of people as a browser-based tool, which it's great for planning and analysis if you're trying to figure out the best way to get somewhere or doing some other analysis. That works nice on the web, on the browser where you got a little bigger screen. But it is also a mobile app. It was the first mobile navigation app, in fact, that came out in 2007 as an app. And it does come pre-installed on Android, but it can also be downloaded onto an iPhone. Waze was founded in 2006, not much 1 year after. So they started about the same time. It was founded in Israel, and its original name was FreeMap Israel. In 2009, the company changed its name to Waze Mobile Limited, which is what it's still known as today. What a lot of people don't know is that in 2013, Google bought Waze. So actually, Google owns both Google Maps and Waze, which is kind of interesting. A lot of people thought when that happened, almost 9 years ago, that they would get rid of one or the other, but they've both stayed around, and I think they will both continue to stay around. There's been some migration of features from one to the other, but they still have a very different look and feel. We'll talk about that later. So I think they will keep both of them. And Waze's original mission was to help drivers connect to one another and work together to improve each other's driving experience. And you can kind of tell from that mission statement a little bit what Waze is about and how Waze is going to differ from Google. It always started with a very social mission. It was helping drivers work together and also to improve each other's driving experience. So a very social mission, which is slightly different than Google's mission. We'll point out some of those differences later. In fact, people that use Waze even have a name for themselves. They're called Wazers. So that's the name that they use to refer to each other. Again, kind of reinforcing that community aspect of Waze. So let's talk through some of the functions and features. In terms of availability, both apps are available on either Apple or Android, and they're both compatible with Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. So no real differences there in terms of availability and use with the mobile car apps. Travel mode options is where we're going to start to see some differences. When they both are a tool you use to get from point A to point B, but with Google Maps, you've got a lot of choices about how you get from point A to point B. You can have Google Maps show you the best way to walk, to drive, to cycle, or even use public transportation. So it gives you lots of different modes of travel. Waze is pretty much, or it is exclusively car and motorcycle. However, this is interesting. It does have motorcycle, which Google Maps doesn't. And the motorcycle is kind of interesting, especially for any people that are motorcyclists. Wazers riding in that motorcycle mode will be directed on routes that are optimized for motorcyclists based on where other people riding motorcycles using Waze have gone. And this will become a little more clear as we go along, but Waze relies heavily on people using the app while they're driving, and they can tell from the app if they have it set as motorcycle mode or car mode. And they will find having been a motorcyclist for years, that motorcyclists like different types of roads. They like smaller roads, more country roads, roads with lots of waves and turns in them, whereas cars are typically trying to get there the fastest way they can get there. So this says here, motorcyclists lots of times like narrow streets that cars would avoid. So that's an interesting distinction, that the one of the two it has is different than the 5 or 6 that Google has. So depending on what your favorite mode of transport is, that might be one differentiating factor. Questions about that one? And if you're not familiar how that works, I can show you when we do the demo later. So let's talk about how each one of them selects the initial route. So when you go into the app and say, I want to go from point A to point B, both of them have to figure out how it's going to route you. And Google uses what I would call a data-driven approach to figuring that out. Google will identify all the possible routes between your starting point and your destination. There are a lot of them, but it's a huge computer that's doing this. And it utilizes a lot of information to try and weed through all the possible routes you could take and find the top routes. It utilizes stored maps that it has available to the computer, information from satellites and traffic sensors, which can tell you things about if there may be slowdowns, backups, things going on. It uses historical information regarding traffic on certain days of the week, times of day. As you can imagine, in a big city, it takes much longer to get from point A to point B during rush hour than it does off hours. It's typically faster on the weekends than during the week. So it has all of that information in there. And so it churns all that information through a huge computer program and scores all the different routes available, and looking for things like the shortest distance, toll roads, traffic conditions at that time of day, and comes back with the highest scoring routes. It usually shows you 2, sometimes more than 2, but almost always it'll give you a choice of 2 different routes. But it shows you which one scored the highest and which one scores next highest. And again, if you have questions, let me know. Waze goes at this in a different way, which again kind of goes back to that community-based approach. And the primary source of data that Waze uses is just from people driving around with the Waze app open on their smartphone. Now, if the Waze app isn't open, they can't tell where you're going. But if you have Waze open, it can tell where you're driving. And they use that information to build their maps kind of from the bottom up based on the